Hello again. Here's three fancy words for you. Japa, Vichara, and Dhyana. I'll use those three words from time to time throughout some of the other presentations we're doing, but here I wanted to introduce the words to you. They are three general different ways of using mantra, of using any mantra. Of course, we're talking here about the granddaddy of all mantras, which is Om. Japa. Let me tell you a story. It's a little fun little story that makes Japa make sense. Think of a glass. Here is a glass. Now, I'm not going to demonstrate this whole, I'm going to make up the story. I'm not going to demonstrate the whole thing. This got a little thing on it here. I'm not going to fully demonstrate the whole thing. I've thought about it, but it would be kind of messy. Imagine that the glass is filled with ink, pen ink, liquid ink, like an old-fashioned pen that has, really liquid ink, not a ballpoint pen where it's sticky and gooey, but liquid ink. And that liquid ink is what's here. We talked about this before. If you turn this sideways, down here in the latent unconscious, this is where our habit patterns are stored. Our attachments and aversions and our fears and our hot buttons that make us angry or whatever, those are in the latent unconscious. So imagine that latent unconscious is like a water glass that has been filled full of really nice dark blue ink. Now, what do you do with your glass full of ink? You would say, well, it's a nice there. I'll just take my glass and, I'll just dump it out, pour it in a fresh glass of water. But that doesn't really seem to work very, very well, because we want to keep living. Those habit patterns that are in that latent unconscious define me as the charming person that I am and define you as the charming person that you are. So we're not trying to destroy ourselves, but some of us have some silly habits in there that are attractions and aversions and fears and lots of little false identities that we have collected over you choose your own worldview over this lifetime over many, many lifetimes. Whichever way you hold that in your perspective, the principle is still valid. It's stored down there in the latent unconscious, and it's like this glass filled with ink. Now, now you see, I'm not going to do this. I'll show you, but I'm not going to actually do it. You take a glass of nice, pure, fresh, clean water. That's what this is. And then you take a dropper, a little dropper, like what kind of dropper? An ear dropper, eye dropper, or an in your mouth little dropper. Sometimes we take vitamin B12 like that, a little dropper thing. And you take one little drop of water and you put it into your glass of ink. And you think, well, this is kind of silly. That did absolutely nothing. All it did was I put one stupid little drop of water in this glass of ink, but if you put another one and you put another one and you put another one, over a considerable period of time, gradually what happens, it's just a story, it's a metaphor. The glass of ink overflows and it runs down the side, and gradually the dark ink in the glass gets lighter and lighter and lighter, and eventually you have a glass full of pure water. But never along the way did you do any destruction, like taking the definition of you as a person, which is your latent unconscious, your samskaras, your habit patterns that define you as you. You don't have to kill yourself and destroy yourself by dumping out the ink. It just gradually replaces itself. This is one of the wonderful things about mantra. And I started you with this one because this is the principle of japa. Japa means basically repeating a mantra. So I can sit around all day long going Om, 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 chanting Om. Or we can get together with friends and chant Om, and people put out songs and CDs and things that are groups of people. Maybe we will put here for you an Om track. Maybe we'll insert this in here and let you hear a little track of some voices doing Om. We'll see about that later. So if all of a sudden that shows up here, you'll know where that came from. Okay? But this is what we're doing with the mantra. We're repeating the mantra. One way of doing this that is more of a formal practice, the name here doesn't matter, but is called a purascharna, is a long practice of mantra. So you may say, well, I'm going to do a simple purascharna mantra. I'm going to go get a mala bead, a counting bead, and I'm going to hold this before I do my quiet seated meditation every day. I'm going to do one round around the mala, which is usually 108 beads, and I'm going to do Om internally. I'm going to do a breath. I'm going to inhale and I'm going to exhale in my mind with an Om. And I roll the mala bead one time, and then I do it again, and internally, silently, I go Om. And I roll the mala bead one more time, and as best I can, over a period of time, I attempt to remember that that Om has 4 parts. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm attempting to allow the Ah and the U and the lead me to silence, which is a significator of that pure consciousness itself. So that's one repetition of Om, and I roll the mala bead one time. And so this little purascharna maybe is I say, I'm going to do this every day for 40 days. Nice auspicious number. Or you say, I'm going to do this every day until the end of the year, December 31st. Or I'm going to start from today and I'm going to do it 365 days every day for a year. I'm going to do 1 mala of this a day. And this is called japa. This is a form of japa. And so 2 kinds of japa in general. One is that you do a japa practice at a specific time of day, seated in your chair or on your couch or on your butt in your meditation posture, sitting on your cushion or on your regular meditation chair. And maybe that is preparation, part of preparation for your meditation itself. But both of those are japa. And gradually what we are doing is allowing japa to turn into ajapa japa. Japa means intentionally remembering. So if I go Om, 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 I'm intentionally remembering that Om. That's called japa. Advertising people are very, very aware of ajapa japa. They create a little song, they call jingle sometimes, that is the music that goes along with the advertisement that you see. And after a while, you've seen it 10, 20 times, you've heard that little song, and next thing you know, that little song is going on in your mind. It's going on automatically. And that's the meaning of the word ajapa. When you put a or a in front of a word, it reverses it. So japa means repeating, and ajapa means not repeating, means not intentionally, but it's ajapa japa, so it's repeating, but automatically. And so this is a good thing to happen with japa practice. But remember, japa, I'm trying to introduce japa, vichara, and dhyana. And the japa is the first piece I'm trying to talk about. That remember, the effect is that what we're trying to do is put more drops of clear water into our latent unconscious, and it gradually helps to purify our unconscious mind. Gradually helps us to learn to be increasingly non-attached to those things or objects or attitudes to which we are normally habitually attached. It purifies the unconscious mind. Very, very useful practice. That's called japa. And so remember the glass. It empties. And if that gets empty, if that gets even a little bit diluted, then when we are having our meditation time or contemplation and we're trying to move inward, this becomes less slowly over time. It becomes slowly less and less of an obstacle. So old fears and old angers and attachments and aversions are not as strong as they used to be. And so the glass is becoming more water-like than ink-like. And it's getting closer and closer to being able to experience this, which is down here. And again, you can count fingers, you can count this way, or you can count you decide which way you want to count fingers. but that's what japa is about. Vichara. Vichara means, the simplest word that we have in common language is contemplation. We talked before that these levels are of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, and conscious, active unconscious, latent unconscious. Vichara is the contemplation with awareness of what I am doing at those levels of consciousness. So if I am being mindful right now, if I'm practicing mindfulness right now, that what I'm doing, I'm simply being aware that I am speaking right now, and that I'm using my conscious mind to speak to you, and I'm drawing upon my latent memories of English language and this subject that I'm talking about, I'm drawing upon that. And I'm aware to some degree of that middle ground, of that active unconscious microchip processor that's doing that. I'm contemplating on those levels of my functioning. If I'm even intuitively, slightly intuitively aware that, wait a minute, behind all of this, behind my active talking and behind my active unconscious processing mind and behind my memories that identify English language and that identify me as a person, behind that there is life itself, or consciousness itself, this question mark. It's the dot that's on this Om, remember that? If I'm attempting to be aware of those, pondering, brooding, thinking about, this is called vichara. It's a very, very useful practice. And the contemplation on these principles, we're going to be talking a lot more about these principles, but as we advance with our literal practice of contemplation, of being mindful or aware of these, as we do these, it gradually leads us further and further inward into an incredibly deep stillness and silence. And that's the silence that is at the end of the Om. There's the Om, and there's the silence, which is called sometimes the fourth state. Remember, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is, fancy word is Turiya. The Sanskrit word is Turiya. So vichara is, I'm actively observing these things, and maybe I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking, where are these words coming from? I'm sitting here thinking, I'm sitting here jabbering. Or I'm sitting here and I'm kind of daydreaming about people that I know and places that I'm planning on going to pretty soon. I'm going somewhere on a trip pretty soon. So as I'm sitting here talking to you, by the time you see this, that trip that is now in the future will be probably long in the past. But right now, that trip is in the future. It's next week. And so that comes forward. I can contemplate on that. How is this process working? And all I remember, because I was out here in the world and I planned this trip, and so now I have memories of that trip that is forthcoming, and it's stored in my latent unconscious mind. And now while I'm sitting here talking to you, that's coming forward to me in my conscious mind, and I'm thinking about that. But not only am I thinking about the trip, now I'm contemplating on how that trip got into my unconscious mind. Because I was doing activities out here, I was talking to other people, should we do this trip? We're planning. We're on telephones and doing internet stuff on web pages, booking things and doing all of those kind of activities. And all of that got stored in my latent unconscious. And so now here I am that, it's coming forth. It's coming through my microprocessor of my active unconscious mind, and now it's out here in my conscious mind. And as I'm pondering, not the trip, here it doesn't matter about the trip, that's irrelevant, but what I'm pondering about is the nature of how this mental process is working inside of somebody called me. And as I'm doing that pondering or that contemplation, that reflection is called vichara. So there is japa and vichara, and I'm doing that in the context of vichara with the levels of consciousness that are mapped out by the Om. And again, it doesn't matter whether it's this picture of Om or this picture of Om, or if again I'm counting my fingers, again, either direction that I want to go. I usually find myself going this direction because my hand is conveniently, when I hold my hand up, it tends to come up this way, not this way. So I usually count 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know what I do with the thumb. The thumb is just sort of a bonus. It's sort of like dessert after a meal. And see, where did I get that idea? It came from my latent unconscious, and it came forward. And I thought, oh, that thumb is a little bit like a mango. That sounds pretty yummy. I think I'll suck on it. No, bad humor. Anyway, so that's Vichara. The third word is Dhyana. Dhyana means meditation. That what you and I commonly know of as I am going to sit on my butt and I'm going to meditate on something. This is the word Dhyana. What do we do with Dhyana? If I'm going to meditate on my friendly apple that is over here, I may start with apple, apple, apple. I may gaze at the apple. I remember the apple. And then gradually I turn my senses inwards. My eyes are no longer being used to see this apple. I'm not using my touch to hold the apple. I'm not chewing on the apple to eat it. It's now over there on the table. And now I'm internally, mentally being aware of an apple. And I am focusing my attention and my awareness on that apple. And when the memory of my next week trips comes forward, what do I do with that? Absolutely nothing. Because right now I'm busy meditating on my apple. And so meditation has something to do with concentrating, very gently, concentrating the mind. And quite naturally, other thoughts like next week's trip come into mind. But what do I do with that? Absolutely nothing. What do I do with the camera in front of me? Absolutely nothing. Because right now I'm closing my eyes. I'm not forcing it. They just automatically close. Because now I'm trying to do dhyana on the apple. And at first there are distractions and interruptions that come, but gradually those fade away. And I'm sitting here, and it is as if, it may not be perfect, but it is as if the only object in my mind is the apple. And this is called dhyana, meditation on apple. It's not japa on apple. It's not going apple, mala bead, apple, 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 apple. It's not contemplating the nature of apple. And in the case of Om, I'm not doing japa of Om, repeating the Om. I'm not doing vichara of Om, thinking about the levels of consciousness and pondering that. That may come into my mind, into my awareness as I move inward. But internally, I, for example, allow myself to mentally remember Om, and it goes Om to silence. And my attention goes internally, not with my lips and my vocal cords, but internally in mind only. The Om just goes to silence. And possibly my attention falls to rest here in my heart, the place where I feel, my own existence, the place where when we all say me, where do we point? Nobody, when did you ever see anybody say, me, and point to our left shoulder? Nobody does that. Nobody says me and points down to a knee. Everybody says me, we point here. So we already know that there's something about this heart center or chakra or whatever you want to call it, but we all are already aware of that. So my internal Om leads me to where? Silence. And in that silence, at the end of the Om, I am doing dhyana on that fourth state, that awareness itself. Not on waking, not on dreaming, not on deep sleep, not conscious thinking, not active unconscious, not latent unconscious thinking, but consciousness itself. Just that subtlest aspect of me, what's left of me when I set aside all of my attractions, aversions, and fears, and they just fall away, and there's just awareness. And this is dhyana of Om. So we have japa of Om, we have vichara of Om, and we have dhyana of Om. You might want to go back through this, play with all three of them, but as we go through more of these talks together, I will mention each of them from time to time in there about japa and about vichara and about dhyana. Okay? Thanks for playing. See you soon.